listening to Seniors Junction podcast. We're preventing seniors isolation one conversation at a time. Your hosts today are Namrata Bagaria and myself, Paul Merkley. We're the co-founders of Seniors Junction, and our very special guest today is thanatologist Karen Omand. And thank you for being here. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So I'm a rare breed. I'm a thanatologist. So I study bereavement, grief, and loss. I got my degree last year at Western Ontario in Canada here, and that's what I've studied. What I do is counseling and education for seniors, and counseling for all sorts of losses.
Okay, and now the last time I checked, which is admittedly a little bit of time ago, there were very, very, very few thanatology programs in the world. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I think, actually, I looked this up. I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's the only degree in Canada and I think North America, but I know there's a lot of certifications in Thano, but there's not a lot of degrees. It's actually interesting because I'm getting a lot of interest because people have never heard of this before. So.
Right, and yet, grief and loss is something we all experience. There's a great deal of grief, and also some of the thanatology models are very different from, let's say, psychological models. Is that right?
That's true. We use a different type of. Sorry. No,
so a person could. In effect, someone not knowing about thanatology, one could end up in the wrong slot. You could be someone suffering a loss and try to have someone try to approach it with you in a psychological way. You might be better off with a thanatological model.
Yeah, I've had a few. I've had a few actually that have there's still that you need closure type of attitude from psychologists and stuff. So yeah, there is a different, we have a different approach for sure.
Right. Psychologists think there's closure, and thanatologists know there is no such thing as closure.
That's right.
Yeah, what's the difference?
Agreed.
Somebody could be diagnosed as suffering from depression. It might be chronic loss, chronic sorrow, which is a different thing from your perspective.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot that that I've dealt with that are on a lot of medications too, right after a loss, and some need it obviously, and some maybe not so much. They're just grieving really hard. So. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Nam, you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So Karen, in your line of work, you must have come across senior isolation. And according to you, what are the pain points in senior isolation?
So I deal with mostly seniors that are grieving. You know, I don't, they lost their spouse or child loss. And most of them in my view have been very, very isolated in their journey. So some are very stoic, some are confused, some are very lonely. And some have been in retirement homes, some have been at homes. So my experience is more with grief, not so much just general isolation, but grief itself is isolating anyways. So it makes it even harder when they're on their own. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does answer your question. We've had Robertmundle in one of our previous podcasts, and he deals a lot with grief and loss and bereavement and isolation. He's a spiritual counselor. And so I think what was interesting to me was what you said, right? He said that one of the things is we are in times of collective grief, and we've not really had the chance to sit with our losses because we come in a culture where we have to celebrate the person who's passed on to the other side, and we don't really sit with what we feel as bereavement. And he's like, it's important for us to sit with our grief and understand. That's what he said.
Yeah, we also don't do grief well here. We don't support well. We don't validate well. We don't talk about it well. So even some of the seniors at Chartwell, I had one older guy that he hadn't talked about his sister that died decades ago. And it finally started coming out in one of our supportive talks. And so a lot of people don't talk about it. We are a very society where it's like, okay, are you done yet? Have you finished? You know, so it's really, really hard for grievers anyways to talk and to be validated, seniors included. I think even more so, some of the seniors I've dealt with, they're so stoic and they're so repressive, right? They push everything down because I think that's the model of what we taught them, like what our culture has taught them too.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, cultural grieving is very cultural too, right? My father passed on to the other side earlier this year. And in my faith, we have it for 14 days, we have a grieving. And it's different, like sometimes it feels very long, but sometimes it feels just about right, you know, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening in that. Like, firstly, everybody comes. So the traumatic part in my culture is everybody will ask you, so what happened? And then every time you have to repeat that story, and it's very insensitive for us. And I had to repeat that story many times. And it's just very traumatic to repeat the whole thing, what happened. So we started saying, you know, just like I made up a short story. The other thing was on day 3, they have a musical kind of a thing for a tribute. Like it's all devotional songs, but the rhythm is slow and the songs are slow. And even if you are stoic, which I was when that happened, because somebody had to be a little bit strong for all the procedures to happen, you know, you can't, like, it just comes out. And then you have a process where you're reading stories, like they have a bit of a spiritual religious tint, like both spiritual and religious separate. And they were quite interesting. So at the same time, they're installing hope. It was very unique, you know. And of course, I took grief counseling for myself at least. And then there's a cultural barrier for many people, even if they can afford psychology or grief counseling. I took it as a preventive measure because I live by myself in Canada. And I was worried that the Ottawa winters might break me. So before that, I should at least, I mean, address it and have tools to. But what you're saying, it becomes even more difficult when you have models of the world in your head, or models of grieving, models of things, and where today there is more access to different kinds of help that's available to deal with this.
Yeah, I agree. Every grief is unique though, right? Like we're all so different. We grieve also uniquely. And that's half of my battle when I'm talking to people, when I'm counseling them, is education. It's psychoeducation. It's Is this normal? Yes, this is normal. So that's half of what I do.
Yeah, because for a lot of people, I know grief comes out as aggression. They're angry. And after, like, it took me a while to understand that the anger is grief. And then so some people, they're aggressive or they are self-destructive, like smoking, drinking, eating disorders. That's grief too. So for me, this journey of what happened in my life gave me an insight to the many other unresolved losses I had, which I didn't know, you know, and I thought you just move on and get on with life, like, you know, just dust it off. And this is only when I met a doctor in Ottawa. She's a new German medicine practitioner, along with, she's certified in naturopathy and all. And she showed me this model where, you know, grief is related to like ovarian health. It's related to different kinds of health in people. And I didn't know, like, you know, because I trained in allopathy and that's everything is compartmentalized, right? This department doesn't talk to this department. So yeah, like when we work, especially with seniors, I think we come across one group, which is the recently widowed. So that's the early 60s. I mean, anybody, but let's say, or recently retired. So they have a different kind of a loss versus the later ones in the 80s, late 90s, where they're the only ones left and everybody they knew has passed on. And that's a different kind of a loss. So have you seen such kind of grief differences or isolation differences?
Well, I haven't dealt with a lot of retirement losses, but I know we had to study it at school, and I know it is a loss. It's a non-death loss, we call it. most of my losses are the widows like Paul was, or a lot are 60, 70-year-olds that are having to, they've lost their secure base and safe haven, we call it, and they have to build up their foundation again and build a new identity. I want to bring back just what you're saying about sometimes, a lot of times when you're grieving, physiologically as well as biologically, you're affected, right? Because your cortisol levels are out of whack. Your brain is grieving, your digestive system's grieving. So it's a lot of self-care. You have to be really careful with acute grievers at the beginning, because physiologically and biologically, you're affected greatly. So.
Thank you.
You've told us a lot about your vision for isolation and in the context of grieving. Maybe you'd like to add a bit to that, and I'll just sneak in a word or two about our idea of what we do. We feel that a person's autonomy, their connectedness to others, and their sense of purpose are central to their surviving and thriving. And does that fit with your vision? And is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, that fits perfectly. So the major things I look for when I'm dealing with, when I'm helping people, is meaning reconstruction, which is Dr. Niemeyer, which is my guru in my field. That's one of his main things, is meaning reconstruction. So having meaningful life again in a new, changed, different world, obviously, because you're changed forever after a big loss. That's what in thanatology, we feel that's one of the biggest cursors on if you're going to be okay or not, is if you can find meaning in life again. Another thing is, as you said, connection and support. It's vital. With seniors, it can be very hard. They need that community. They need that cognitive interaction with people for their own health, like for everything, health, self-care. Autonomy is important as well. Like they need to be able to feel that they can do things on their own, because as I was saying before, for me in my grief world anyways, when you lose a spouse, like or parent, whatever, or not parent, a child, you lose, it's called, sorry, I've lost my train, detachment distress. So that's one thing, but also your secure base. So your autonomy, when you were a team, as Paul would know with him and Laura, when you're a team, you were like together as a team. When you lose that, you have to somehow get your autonomy back again, and just on your own identity. And that takes a lot of strength and courage, right? Because if you've been a team together for 40, 50 years, your whole foundation is broken, like I said before, but you need to somehow figure out navigate this new journey without that person that you were so close to. So autonomy, rebuilding that on your own is a journey, but it can happen. I've seen it. I've talked to a lot of widow and widowers over the years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, it does.
I just supplemental question. From your perspective, are there differences in how this is experienced by the two genders? Do men experience it differently from women?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about different type of grieving styles, so there's instrumental, which is the doers. They build houses, or they'll build sheds, or they'll do projects, not even just physical, even mental, right? Like they'll do it. And then there's intuitive, and they're the ones that, they show their emotions, they need support, they get counseling. And generally we sway in between the two. When my mother died, I had to pound the pavement, but I also had to do support group and counseling. So generally we all sway. So men generally are more on the instrumental. They'll do things, and women tend to be more on the intuitive. However, we do tend to sway between the both. Like you'll see men will show some emotion, and then women will do some instrumental too. So there is gender differences, but I've seen it both. So it sways.
And sometimes it's also stepped, right? Like in my case, I was the intuitive first, because I was aware that this happens, and I was aware. So for me, it was not taking on another project or using workaholism or any kind of thing as an escape, because then it's going to come out someday, if not today, tomorrow. It's going to come out, right? It's like a volcano was waiting to burst.
I've had two people that they lost their parent 40 years ago and 30 years ago, and now they're just dealing with it now.
Yeah.
So you cannot, I know we try to repress and repress, as you said, it does come out. It'll come out in irritability, anger, health issues, sadness, whatever. So it does come out.
Yeah, I think thanks to the doctor who had told me that, like, I knew her from before. So she had said, and anyways, this had not happened. But I remember she wrote a prescription for me. It was literally RX, go slow. She just wrote like 2 words, go slow. And I was laughing. And then, the next thing she wrote, sit with your grief. And this was way before, like I didn't have any family member pass on. And so for me at that time, I couldn't understand, because I thought I really understood psychology and I knew so much of mental health. And I'm like, what is she talking about? And then of course I found there's so much to learn every day. But then when this happened, I made sure I sat with my grief, and I made sure I communicated to the ones that I work with, or I know that I am grieving right now. Paul knows this. Like I made sure that I take my space, but at the same time, not shut down help or support that comes, because a lot of time grievers are very, Paul, what is that word you said? Grievers are self-absorbed in their grief, and they can't see the support, help that people may be giving them.
When in an acute grief, we call it narcissistic grief. And that is valid because they're in so much pain. So when I meet somebody and it's just been like a month or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, it's not a lot of talking, it's just a lot of listening, because they're in so much pain and you're not able to see anything other than what you're going through. So Paul was right.
Yeah, and given that the vision is basically to help people find ways to find their autonomy again, and that of course leads to more connectedness and more relatedness with others. What do you think are the opportunities and challenges in this kind of rebuilding exercise?
So with grievers, I mean, because I know what your company's about, and I think it's really good. It's just finding at the right time with the grievers, because as we said, they're narcissistic at the beginning, right? And they cognitively, if you guys all remember, you're not, your brain is grieving, so you're not really ready to do courses. However, that being said, I've had some that have done, have decided to, about 4 or 5 months into their grief, have actually signed up for scheduled courses because they need to get out of bed and they need to do something. I had one that I was so proud of her. She said, okay, I signed up for a course. It's every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock and I have to be there. And even though her Zoom might have been blocked, like her video might have been off, like the Zoom, she still listened and she still tried. And that was one of the things that she built. One of her foundations was, okay, I had to do this on Wednesdays. And then another course came up. And so there is structure that I really like. I try to encourage them to have something purposeful, because in grief we call it the dual process model. So there's that loss orientation and restorative. So when they're doing something like what you guys do, at least at that very moment, they may not be grieving for an hour, right? So they're in a restorative processing right there. So then their brain pathways are at least changing from just solidly 24/7 grief. So I do like that model that you guys have there with the structured courses that I think some of them would be really interested in, because it gives them purpose again or something, right?
Thank you. And I think this was after extensive market research and testing services. Like we've had one-time events, we did a lot of experimentation, quick one, rapid experimentation. So like you were saying, that the model that we have, it does help build autonomy and purpose. And one of the things that we were conscious about is to have an 8-week intervention, because in mental health, from my previous background in research and community-based research, 8 weeks is the time for any kind of brief interpersonal therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever. And we're not doing therapy, but we're using serious leisure.
So we've almost finished our second batch. These first 2 courses have been experimental in a way for us to see just how it works. But first two courses have been experimental, and we've almost finished the second one. So we've tried a lot of things in it, and we think we see ways that it helps them relate to each other and it helps them find purpose a bit. I think that's what Nam would have said, something like that. So I'll ask what advice you have for our company.
Well, I kind of already answered that, right? Because I said, you know, keep the eight week courses, having structure, having interesting courses like the group that the seniors I deal with, they're wonderful. Like they are so curious. You know, they like discussion. So if you engage with them, I don't know if you guys have been doing that in your courses, but it's just like a classroom, right? Engage and yeah, they've been a real treat. We really like them. So I think if you offer, and then that's that connection, right? Like whoever you guys are teaching, right? Like who's ever there, they get to know you just like anything, right? Just like you did with school, Paul, right? Like it's just that engagement every week. You're going to see me, we're going to talk, we're going to learn. And I think they really like that stuff. So I encourage you to keep doing that. Like, and I saw on the webpage, some of the things are really interesting, right? Like that would be they would really like to do, right? Keep them engaged, you know.
They seem to be interested. The ones we've started with seem to take quite an interest and enjoy it. And from what the feedback they've given us, I think it is. And we see them in the discussion periods interacting with each other in different ways. And so building a little community.
Yep.
So we've been very happy with it so far. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nam, you go ahead.
So if people want to reach out to you, Karen, what's the best way to find you?
So I just finally got my webpage up. It's I got griefcounselor.ca. It's with one L. That just came out just this week. And I'm at what else do I or my email address, it's Karen, my new email address, it's karen@griefcounseling.ca. And I'm also at C'est La Vie Wellness in Bronte, where I do virtual and in-person counseling, as well as I do my own at home here virtually. So that's how you can reach me.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Yes, it's really lucky for us to be able to hear from a thanatologist. There aren't very many of you, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm a really rare breed, so I hope there's more of that. I hope it becomes more well known, but with the school as well. So I hope there's more of us because it's really needed, especially with all this COVID now. That's I think grief is on the forefront more so than it ever was before, and there's been a lot of loss for everybody. So it needs to be validated and supported better.
Thank you.